Monday, October 20th, 1913.
We were walking down the principal street of that beautiful city, on a tour of inspection. We want to understand why it was laid out in so many squares, and what was the use of some of the buildings we had noticed on both sides of that Broadway. When we had arrived at the farther gateway, we saw that the city stood very high above the surrounding plains. Our guide explained that the reason for this was that those on the towers might see as far as possible, and also might be seen by those in the distant settlements of this district. This was the capital city of the region, and all business going on found its focus here. On our way back we visited several of the buildings, and were everywhere kindly received. We found few children, other than those in Castrol's home. Here and there, however, there were groups in the squares, where the fountains played and were surrounded by basins, into which their waters fell. These were all connected with one broad stream which issued forth from one side of the city, and fell into the plain below, a brilliant waterfall of many tints and of sparkling brightness. It took its way across the plain, a fairly broad stream flowing gently over the sands, and we saw, here and there, some children bathing in it, and throwing it over their beautiful bodies in great enjoyment. I did not think much of this, until my guide remarked that these children were encouraged to bathe in the waters, as they were electrically charged, and gave strength to them, for many came here very weak and required such nourishment. I expressed my surprise at this, and she replied, "But what would you have? You know that, although not of material flesh and blood, yet our bodies here are solid and real as those we have laid aside. And you know that these bodies of our present state correspond to the spirit within, much more accurately than those others used to do. Now these little spirits are, most of them, only beginning to develop and need bodily nourishment to help them on the way. Why not? Why not, indeed? Surely I was slow to learn all that phrase I have already given you implied, earth made perfect. I fear many of you, when you come over here, will be much shocked to see how very natural all things are, even if more beautiful than on the earth. So many expect to find a vague shadowy world over here, totally diverse from earth in every possible way. And yet, come to think of it, and with common sense, what good would such a world be to us? It would not mean a gradual progress for us, but a vast leap, and that is not the way of God. Things here, when first we arrive, are certainly different from those of the old life, but not so different as to make us feel dumbfounded by their strangeness. Indeed, those who come over after living an unprogressive life on earth, find themselves in spheres of so gross a character as to be to them indistinguishable from earth itself. That is one of the reasons why they are not able to realize that they have changed their state. As you progress through the lower spheres into the higher, this grossness gradually gives place to more rare conditions, and the higher you go the more sublimated is the environment. But few, if any, pass into those spheres where no trace of earth is seen, or no likeness to the earth life. I doubt if, as a rule, any do. But of this I must not speak dogmatically, for I have not myself reached, or even visited, a sphere where there is absolutely no likeness to God's beautiful earth. For it is beautiful, and we have to learn its beauties and wonders here, as part of our training. And, learning so, we find that earth is but one further manifestation outward from our own spheres, and in tune with us and our present environment in many very intimate ways. Were it not thus, we could not be communing with you at this moment. Also, and I merely say this as it appears to me, who am not very wise in these things, I do not see how people passing over from the earth life into this, could possibly get here, were there a great gap between us, a gigantic void. How could they cross it? But that is simply my own thought, and there may be nothing in it at all. Only of this I am fairly certain, if people would but keep in mind the oneness of God and His kingdom, and the gradual progression which, in His wisdom, He has ordained for us, then they would much better understand what death is and what is beyond. It would probably be utterly absurd to many, to be told that here we have real solid houses, and streets, and mountains, and trees, and animals, and birds, and that animals are not here for ornament alone, but also for use, and that horses and oxen and other animals are put to use. But they enjoy their work in a way which makes one glad to watch them. I noticed a horse and rider coming along the street once, and I wondered which was enjoying the canter the more of the two. But I fear this will not be accepted by many, so I will get on to another theme. One of the buildings in the Broad Street was a library where records were kept of reports from the outlying stations. Another was a laboratory, where some of the reports could be tested by actual experiment. Another was a lecture hall, where professors gave their results to those of their own and other branches of science. Another had a somewhat curious history. It stood well back from the street and was built of wood. It looked like polished mahogany, with streaks of gold in the grain. It was erected long ago as a council chamber for the chief of that time, long before Castrol took over the work. Here he used to assemble the students in order that they might each give an exhibition of their knowledge in practical form. A young man arose on one occasion, and, going to the center of the auditorium, stood there and stretched out his hands, and remained facing the president. As he stood there his form seemed to change and become more radiant and translucent, until at last he was surrounded by a large halo of light, and there were seen about him many angels from the higher spheres. His smile had some enigma in it which the prince was trying to read, but could not. Just as he, the prince or chief, was about to speak, there came through the open door a little boy child, and looked round in surprise at all the great crowd. He paused at the edge of the circle and looked on the multitude of faces of those who sat there in tiers, one above the other, round the circle, and seemed abashed. He was just turning to run away again when he caught sight of the one who stood in the center, now glowing with light and glory. Immediately the little lad forgot everybody else, and, running as fast as his little legs would carry him, he went straight to the center of the circle with outstretched hands and a look of great joy in his face. The one who stood there then lowered his arms, and, stooping down, took up the little one and laid him on his shoulder, and then, approaching the prince, he gently laid the little fellow in his lap and began to walk back towards the place where he had stood. But as he went his form grew dim, and, before he had reached the spot he had left, he had become quite invisible, and the whole space was empty. But the little boy lay in the prince's lap, and looked up into his face, a very beautiful face it was, and smiled. Then the prince arose, and, holding the child on his left arm, he reverently laid his right hand on his head, and said, "My brothers, it is written, a little child shall lead them," and these words come to my mind but now. What we have seen is a manifestation of our Lord the Christ, and this little one is of those who are of the kingdom, as he said. What message did he give you, child, as you lay in his arms, and he brought you to mine? Then for the first time the boy spoke and said, with a child's accent and still very shy of the large audience, "If you please, Prince, I must be good and do as you instruct me, and then he will show me, from time to time, new things for your city and realm. But I don't know what it means." Nor did the prince, nor the students at first. But he dispersed them and took the little one home to his own house, and thought the matter out. He came to the conclusion it was Eli and Samuel over again, without the more unpleasant details. As a matter of fact, as it turned out, he had read the matter correctly. The child was allowed to play about the laboratories and scientific schools, and watch and listen. He never was in the way, and did not bother them with questions. But now and again, when some extra difficult piece of work was on hand, he would make some remark, and when he did so, it was always the key to the solution. Also, and this was considered, as time went on, to be the principal object he had in giving that manifestation, the students learned simplicity, that is, that the simpler the solution they could find to any problem in particular, the better it fitted into the general scheme with other solutions. There were many other lessons also, which they learned from the vision itself, for instance, the fact that his presence was among them always, and that at any time he might become visible, for, when he came that time, he walked out from among the assembly of students. Also, the outstretched arms taught them of self-sacrifice, even in those happy realms where glories shone about them, even as it had shone about his form as he stood there. But the child, he grew as his divine sponsor had grown, in wisdom and stature, and when the prince of that time was taken into a higher sphere, he succeeded him in his high office. Well, all this is long ago, and still the old hall stands today. It is always kept carefully tended and made beautiful without and within with flowers. But it is not used now for lectures and discussions, but for service of worship. One of the artists of the city made a painting of the scene, and that was placed there behind the altar, like many on earth. And from time to time, worship is offered to the great Father of all, in the sanctifying presence of his anointed Son, and, on some of the greater occasions, the Prince who was there when that vision was given, will descend from the higher spheres with the little boy, now a great angel Lord, and others who have held the office since their time, and those who assemble there know that some great blessing and manifestation will be given. But only those who are fitted by their developed state are present at such times, for the manifestation would not be visible to those who have not reached a certain stage in progress. God's spheres are wonderful in their beauty of light and glory, but most wonderful of all seems the presence of his Spirit through all these infinities and eternities, and his tender love to all, both wise and simple, and to you and me dear, in that he has so ordained the cooperation of the different estates within his realm, that we can talk together thus, you and I dear, through the thin veil which hangs between.